So today we are starting neurology, and I will finish neurology in around 40 to 50 lectures. So today first lecture is approach to the headache. So we all know what is headache. So if I talk what is the most common headache in India, if I talk of India, the most common headache in India is it is tension type headache. It is tension type headache. We will study in detail about tension type headache, but here you have to just understand that most common. But for tension type headache, Indian people doesn't go to the OPD. So if they ask you most common headache for which people come to OPD, then you have to answer migraine, because most of the people, when they are having tension type headache, they take NSAIDs or they take rest and it is relieved, so they don't go to OPD. Now, what is tension type headache? So first you have to understand that tension type headache, the duration is around 30 minutes to 7 days. Please remember, this has changed. Now it is from half an hour to a week, that is 7 days. Now this is the duration. Now, out of the four things that the International Society on Headache has mentioned, two has to be there. What is first? The first is it should be bilateral. Generally it is bilateral. So tension, although it can be unilateral, but generally it is bilateral. So tension type headache is generally bilateral, and it is band like, and it is non-pulsatile. Non-pulsatile. What is band like? The patient will tell you that it feels like a band around my head, and if I if tie some cloth around my head, I feel relief. This is called as a band like, which is characteristically seen in cases of the tension type headache, and it is non-pulsatile. Here you have to understand that pulsatile headache, if there is it is in the question, you have to think in terms of migraine. Okay, although in tension type headache pulsation can also be present, but for your purpose, for MCQ, if there is a pulsatile thing is characteristically attached to the migraine. Third, the intensity is mild to moderate. Mild to moderate means that the person can do his daily activity, that will not prove to be an hindrance in the daily activity. Whereas when we'll compare this with the migraine, the migraine headache is so severe that patient is not able to do his daily activity, and he goes into a dark room. He or she generally take a rest, try to sleep. Whereas in mild to moderate, most of, for example, in our home, our mother generally have tension type of headache and it is mild to moderate. They cook, they do their household work, so they don't stop. So this is that is what mild to moderate means. And then the fourth point is that it is not aggravated by, it is not aggravated by, it is not aggravated by the physical activity. This is very important point. Now Harrison specifically mentioned this, that the most important difference between a tension type headache and migraine can be the difference can be make difference can be made just by this, because migraine headache is aggravated by the physical activity, but the tension type headache is not aggravated by the physical activity. This is especially mentioned in the Harrison. Now, so but there are certain things by which this tension type headache can be aggravated. What are these things? So you have to remember some point. For example, anxiety can precipitate the tension type headache. Secondly, depression, that can precipitate it. Then fatigue, if the person is fatigued, light, noise, these all things can precipitate it. This we have to understand. Now it is bilateral, it is band like, mild to moderate, and not aggravated by physical activity. Out of this, any two has to be present. Now very important associated feature, which is specifically mentioned by the International Headache Society, that it is not associated with nausea or vomiting. Please remember, if in a patient of headache you are labeling that person with the tension type headache and that person is having nausea or vomiting, you have to assure yourself before labeling that person with tension type headache, because nausea or vomiting are generally not a feature of the tension type headache. Now It can be associated with photophobia or phonophobia. I am writing photophobia or phonophobia both, because if both are present, it is not a tension type headache. One can be present. It is specifically mentioned in the International Headache Society. They have mentioned that photophobia or phonophobia can be present, but if both are present, it is not a tension type headache. This you have to understand. So this was regarding the tension type headache. Now, what is the best drug for the treatment? You have NSAIDs, the best drug. For example, paracetamol, ibuprofen, 400 mg, 8 hourly you can use. Or combination of ibuprofen and paracetamol, for example, Combiflame, and or you can simply use Brufen. Okay, so this is the drug in tension type headache. Now you have a question: which of the following best describe the typical sensation of a tension type headache? Thumping or pulsating? No, I said that thumping or pulsation is seen in migraine. Sharp stabbing pain behind one eye? No, this is a characteristic feature of cluster type of headache that we'll see. A steady non-throbbing tight band around the head? Yes, this is the answer. Intense pressure accompanied by nausea and vomiting? I have told you that nausea and vomiting are not a feature of tension type of headache. Now, second question: which of the following is a common trigger for tension type headache that we have seen? Stress and poor posture? Yes. Eating age? No, it is not related to the eating. Exposure to flickering? No. A specific aura? This is generally seen in case of migraine. So specifically, International Society on Headache has mentioned stress. They have especially mentioned stress and poor posture. For example, if you sleep in the poor posture and in the morning you have a headache, that is generally a tension type headache. So this is what I have already told you: anxiety, depression, fatigue, light noise, and poor posture. So these are the aggravating factor, but they are not aggravated by the physical activity. Now, according to International Classification of Headache Disorder, which of the criteria must be met to distinguish tension type headache from a migraine without aura? Now, the presence of photophobia or phobia, but not both. This I have told you. So they have especially International Classification on Headache Disorder have especially mentioned that the presence of photophobia or phonophobia, but not both. So this is the answer. Okay, total absence? No. Sensitivity to light and sound can be present. I have just told you. Pain that significantly aggravated by routine physical activity such as walking? No, I have told you this doesn't happen. Okay, the headache must be at least 72 hours to be considered chronic. Now this is seen in cases of the migraine. There is no such definition for tension type headache. So according to the Harrison says that if you are, the best thing is that the pain in TTH, that is tension type headache, is not aggravated by the physical activity, but International Classification of Headache Disorder says that the presence of photophobia or phonophobia can be present in tension type headache, but not both, because both are generally present in cases of the classical migraine that we will study. Okay, now red flag sign. What are the red? So if you are in the OPD and you are making a diagnosis of tension type headache to a person, so before labeling a tension type headache or even migraine, you have to remember that this Snoop criteria. If the patient has anything positive for this Snoop criteria, you should not label that patient as tension type headache. What is this Snoop? S is for systemic symptoms. If the patient has systemic symptom in the form of fever, in the form of weight loss, if the patient have HIV or the malignancy, if these things are present, you have to further evaluate the patient before labeling the patient as TTH. Then from N is neurological symptoms. What are neurological symptoms? Like disorientation, even slight disorientation. If there is seizure, if there is focal neurological deficit, if these things are present, then next O is for old age. Here the age is more than 50 years. For example, if the patient comes to you with a headache in this temporal lobe and age is 55, you cannot label that patient as TTH or migraine, because you have to think in terms of giant cell arteritis. Okay. The next O is onset. If the onset is like a thunderclap headache, what is a thunderclap headache? We'll study in detail. A thunderclap headache is a headache which becomes maximum in intensity within seconds or within minutes. So that is called as the thunderclap headache, or the patient can describe it as a worst headache of the worst headache. So this is what is called as a thunderclap headache. And then P is next. P is for the position. Oh, sorry, it's for the progression or pattern. What do we mean by progression? We mean by the progression that the frequency and intensity will change. The person will say that initially I used to have the headache 3 times a month, now I am having 6 times. This is the frequency is increasing. The person says initially I was having a mild headache, now I'm having sudden headache. So this is what is called as the pattern. The pattern is changing, the progression is changing. Or the patient tells that the headache is caused by sneezing or cough. So you can never neglect this thing that is told by a person. So progression and pattern, this is a Snoop criteria, you have to remember it. Okay, now causes of headache. So now these was something, that is tension type headache, which was the most common headache I've explained. Now coming to the causes of the headache. Now there are 6 vascular causes that you have to remember. The first cause is the stroke, ischemic and hemorrhagic. Second cause is vasculitis. Third cause is arterial dissection, which is generally postpartum, seen in postpartum fever. Then cerebral venous thrombosis or reversible, we'll study all these in detail, reversible cerebro vasoconstriction syndrome. Medication overused headache. So stroke, vasculitis, arterial dissection, CVT, medication overused, headache. These are the some vascular causes. I have written the cerebral venous thrombosis and RCVS together. Then non-vascular causes, one is infection, for example meningitis, encephalitis, or for example masses, intracranial mass, example malignancy. Then preeclampsia, most common cause of headache in pregnant women, it is preeclampsia. We'll see this. And then carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay. Thunderclap headache. Thunderclap headache, I have already explained to you that thunderclap headache is the headache which becomes maximum in intensity within seconds or within minutes. Okay. So this is a thunderclap headache. So whenever you think of thunderclap headache, first thing that comes to your mind is subarachnoid hemorrhage, because 40% of the patient with this thunderclap headache have subarachnoid hemorrhage. The second, you can have reversible cerebro vasoconstriction syndrome, that we will see, reversible cerebro vasoconstriction syndrome. Also we can see the cerebral venous thrombosis. Third, post-dural puncture headache. After spinal anesthesia, this is one of the most common cause of headache, which generally precipitate after 6 to 8 hours and can remain for 2 to 3 weeks. It causes a very severe headache, which doesn't respond to the NSAIDs. Okay, so this is PDPH, post-dural puncture headache. Then fourth is arterial dissection. This can also present like a thunderclap headache, very sharp. And pituitary apoplexy. Pituitary apoplexy. What is pituitary apoplexy? Pituitary apoplexy, please, I'll teach it in detail. Pituitary apoplexy is basically the acute hemorrhage or infarction. Both are taken into apoplexy. Acute hemorrhage or infarction of the pituitary gland, which is almost always associated with the macroadenoma of the pituitary. I am again explaining what is pituitary apoplexy. Pituitary apoplexy is basically acute infarction or the hemorrhage of the pituitary, which is almost always associated with macroadenoma. And most common nerve, which is, can anybody tell me which is the most common nerve uh, which is gone in pituitary apoplexy? The answer is third nerve. Okay, so in pituitary apoplexy, the third nerve, it goes down and out. So it is the most common nerve which is gone in pituitary apoplexy. Now, primary headache. Primary headache basically consists of three things. Okay, what are these three things? Primary headache consists of, one is migraine, second is tension type headache that we have already seen, and third is cluster headache. Cluster headache that we'll just see in a minute. We will study in detail about the cluster headache. Okay, so this is what. Now, medication overuse headache. This medication overuse headache is, as the name is implying, it is because of the overuse of the medication. So you can remember the medicines with the, because of which this headache occurs, by the mnemonic of COTES. COTES. What is C? C is for combined analgesic. Combined analgesics. Combined means NSAIDs. Combination of NSAIDs. For example, paracetamol, ibuprofen. And especially if they also contains caffeine. So this is for, so most common drug which causes medication overuse headache is combined analgesic, that is combination of NSAID, and especially if they contains caffeine. O is for the opioids. And if they ask which is the most common opioid which causes MOH, that is medication overused headache, then your answer will be codeine. It is not morphine. This question was asked in UP PGME around 15 to 16 years back, that which is the most common opioid which causes medication overuse headache. So answer is codeine. T is for triptans like sumatriptans, which is used, or rizatriptan, alitryptan, which are used in cases of the migraine. And E is for ergotamines, and S is for simple analgesics. Simple analgesic means if you are using single. For example, now if they ask you which is the NSAID which has the least chance of causing medication overuse headache, can anybody tell me? No one is there. So the most common medicine which is associated with medication which is not associated, which doesn't NSAID, which doesn't causes medication overuse headache. So answer is naproxen. Naproxen. So naproxen has the least chances of causing. That is why in migraine prophylaxis you see most of the doctors write naproxen 500 mg BD. Now, how to make the diagnosis? So for the making of diagnosis, you have to remember one thing, that the drug has to be taken for a period of 3 months. Okay, so you have to write quotes for these 4 drugs. Now, so CO, that is this is for combined analgesic, opioids, triptans, and ergotamines. They have to be used more than 10 days a month for 3 months for diagnosis. Whereas for simple analgesic, that is single analgesic, it is 15 days a month, 15 days a month for 3 months. But for both of them, the duration is 3 months. Second, the headache should be for more than 15 days a month. 15 days a month. Third, headache should stop after stopping drug. If you stop the drug, the headache should be gone. 4, there should be a primary disorder. There should be a primary disorder. Generally, for you will see this in cases of migraine. People of migraine are taking. So there should be a primary disorder. Now, if I ask you out of this, which is the most sensitive or most specific criteria, so your answer will be 3 months. Why? Because headache for more than 15 days a month can also be seen in cases of the migraine. Headache should stop after stopping the drug. This is a retrospective diagnosis. For this, we have to stop the drug and see. And primary disorder should be present, that is example migraine. This is a supportive evidence. This is a supportive evidence. So if anyone asks you which is the most specific out of this, that you have to tell that take duration of the drug should be for 3 months is the most specific criteria, although all the most of the criteria has to be fulfilled. So then you can make the diagnosis of medication overused headache. Now how will you treat this case? The treatment is stop the drug, stop the offending drug, stop the offending drug. This is the first step. Second step is, please understand bridge therapy. Bridge therapy. What is bridge therapy? Now if you have stopped the drug and now you will start the chronic treatment, this I will also explain the same concept in cases of cluster headache. There also we give bridge therapy. So what you have is the acutely what you have done, you have stopped the offending drug, then you will give a drug for the chronic treatment, but that will not prevent the acute attack, because for prophylaxis you will give a drug, for the chronic treatment you will give a drug, but that will not prevent the acute episode of headache. So for that you have to give a bridge therapy so that the effect of the prophylaxis comes into play. So that bridge therapy is in the form of steroid. The bridge therapy that you give is steroid, basically corticosteroid, and it is a high dose, generally 60 mg per day for 7 weeks. Then you taper it over 2 to 3 weeks. So this is the bridge therapy, and same bridge therapy you will give in cases of the cluster headache. You will also give the bridge therapy in case of the cluster headache. So in cases of cluster headache you will also give the bridge therapy, but here remember bridge therapy is given in two cases: in cases of this medication overused headache and in cases of the cluster headache. Both same dose, same tech, same way, and same drug. Now if I ask you which is the best drug, most effective drug for the prophylaxis, which is the most effective drug for the prophylaxis, then your answer will be tricyclic antidepressant. And this has been proven by the randomized control trials. A lot of randomized control trials have proved this is the most effective drug for the treatment of medication overused headache is tricyclic antidepressant, and that too amitriptyline. Amitriptyline, which comes by the name of Triptomer, we all know, and initial dose is 10, that you can start at 25 mg, and it is given in the night time. Okay, so this is the treatment. So this was medication overuse headache. Now this is a very important good question. Now a patient with chronic migraine has been using a combination of sumatriptan and naproxen for 12 days per month over the last 4 months. So this has qualified the 3 months criteria, is taking triptan, and another is NSAID. The report that their headaches are becoming more frequent and less responsive to treatment. According to the ICSD criteria, which of the following is true regarding diagnosis of MOH, that is medication overused? A diagnosis of MOH cannot be made because they are using naproxen. I have said that naproxen has the least chances of causing medication overuse headache, but I didn't say that it will not cause MOH. So this is wrong. The patient meets the criteria of MOH because triptan uses for more than 10 days per month. For 3 months is sufficient for diagnosis. Yes, I have explained you that triptans except 15 days for the simple analgesic, and rest of the drug we have more than 10 days. The patient must completely stop all medication and remain headache free for 2 months before the no. This I have said you, this is a retrospective diagnosis. It is not clinically relevant. Okay. MH can only be diagnosed if the patient is using simple analgesic. No, simple as well as any of the 5 drugs that I have mentioned. So answer will be B. Okay. Now what is a sentinel headache? A lot of time this has been also mentioned in the Harrison and even in the CMDT. What is a sentinel headache? Please remember, a sentinel headache is a single severe headache. Some people describe it as a worse headache. most of the people will start thinking, oh, then what is then what is thunderclap headache? I'll tell you the difference between a sentinel headache and a thunderclap headache. So this is single severe worst headache, and mostly it is self healing, that it is gone by itself. Now, what is actually the sentinel headache? There is a minor leak. For example, if there is an aneurysm, if this is an aneurysm and there is a minor leak, the leak is so minor that it is causing the symptom, but it is self retaining. It has self retain itself, or the bleeding has stopped, and it is so less that even the non contrast CT is not able to pick it up. It is coming negative. So this is called as a sentinel headache. But it is also called as a, now I will tell you its other name and then you will understand. It is also called as a warning headache. It is also called as a warning headache. Why? Because 50% of the people who have sentinel headache will land up into the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So it is a big number, it's a big chunk, that 50% of the person having the sentinel headache will lead into the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So when you do this, when you have a patient of sentinel headache, the person will tell you, I have a severe headache, worst headache. You can also call it a thunderclap headache. But when you will do the first investigation, that is non-contrast CT, that will come negative, because the leak or the blood is very, very, I said, low. Don't write very, very two times. It is just to tell you I have written it two times. So it is very low, that it cannot be picked up by the non-contrast CT. But it is the experience of the clinician that the clinician will go for the next step, even the non-contrast CT, because if the clinician, by applying Snoop criteria, and from this is the difference between book learning and actual clinical practice, that a sentinel headache, will you take it as a normal headache, or after getting a normal NCCT you will go to the next step of the diagnosis, because you are sure that it is some kind of hazardous headache, this is a sentinel headache and not a normal headache, and if I'll not diagnose it here, that can lead to the subarachnoid hemorrhage in the future. So the first investigation is non-contrast CT. But even if after the non-contrast CT, if you think that no, this is something which is dangerous, then you, if the non-contrast CT comes positive, which is a very rare, that in sentinel headache non-contrast CT comes positive, because if non-contrast CT sentinel headache comes positive, it will be called as a now subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, but if it comes positive, the next is the localization step. You will localize that blood is coming from where, and for that you will go for the CT angiography or MR angiography. So MRA, or but it generally doesn't happen. So if the blood comes negative and you are highly of suspicion that it is a sentinel headache, then you will go for the lumbar puncture. Now, very important point is that lumbar puncture, what we see xanthochromia. We see xanthochromia. What is xanthochromia? Xanthochromia is nothing but the oxidized hemoglobin from the RBC. When the RBC hemoglobin get oxidized, it is converted into bilirubin. So that yellow color is called as the xanthochromia, and it is best picked up by the spectrophotometer. So in those center where spectrophotometer is not absent, you will not see it with the naked eye, because most of the time it will not be visible from the naked eye. So if there is a blood, if there is a, now there are two things which can be seen on the lumbar puncture. One, there can be presence of the blood, which you can see with the naked eye. Now, if there is a blood can be because of the two things. Either it is because of the subarachnoid hemorrhage, that is the hemorrhage, or because of the traumatic puncture. So how will you differentiate between those two of them? So you will take 3 to 4 vials. You will collect the blood in the first vial, then you will do the collect in the blood in the second vial, and now you will do the serial dilution. That is, you will put the blood in the third vial and then in the fourth vial. Now, if there will be a traumatic puncture in the fourth or the fifth vial, the number of the blood will decrease and it will be gone in the fourth vial. But in the subarachnoid hemorrhage, because the blood is coming continuously, you will have the almost same amount of blood in all the vials. So this is called as a serial dilution method. So serial collection method. So in serial collection, if the blood remains of the same value, same intensity, then it is called as subarachnoid hemorrhage, and if it decreases, that will be called as traumatic puncture. So this is how you differentiate. Second thing is that the blood gets oxidized into the xanthochromia, which you can best see with the spectrophotometer. Now this xanthochromia takes 6 to 12 hours to form. Therefore, doing of lumbar puncture before 6 to 12 hours is not of good value. But yes, you can do, but it is of not good value. So at least you have to wait for 6 to 12 hours, then only you can get it positive, and that too you should have a spectrophotometer machine. Now if you get this is if you have done the lumbar puncture and that has come positive, so what you will do, then you will again do the localization process. Then you will do the localization by CT or CT angiography or MR angiography. If it is negative, then you can say that it is not a subarachnoid hemorrhage, because if after lumbar puncture there is no xanthochromia on spectrophotometry, no blood, then it is very unlikely that it is a sentinel headache. Then the cause may be something else. This is how you go about it. So first thing is that you go non-contrast CT. The non-contrast CT will come negative. It comes negative, you go for LP puncture, and LP puncture if it comes positive, that you see blood or you see xanthochromia, then you go for the localization. If it comes negative, then you can safely send the patient home, because now you are sure that there is no blood. If I ask you between CT angiography or MR angiography, and on the other side we have lumbar puncture, which has more chances of detecting blood, the answer will be lumbar puncture. So don't think that we should go directly to the CT angiography or MR angiography, because lumbar puncture has a more sensitivity of detecting blood and xanthochromia. Okay. Now, if I see this question, a 48-year-old present to the emergency department with a sudden severe headache that peaked within 2 minutes and has persisted for 6 hours. The patient described it as unusual but not necessarily the worst of their life. It is not the worst, but it is very dangerous. A non-contrast CT head is negative for blood, and a lumbar puncture show 50 RBC in tube 1, 40 RBC in tube 4. That means the number of RBC remains the same. So you can say that it is a subarachnoid hemorrhage, because on serial collection, it has remains almost the same. So it is not because of the traumatic puncture with no xanthochromia, because I have said xanthochromia is generally not seen. Because it is not mentioned, either they are seeing with the naked eye or spectrophotometry. And secondly, the patient has the headache has peaked, the 6 hours has elapsed, so there are chances that xanthochromia was not formed. Okay, so which of the following statement best describe the clinical significance and pathophysiology of a sentinel headache in this context? The absence of xanthochromia definitely rules out a sentinel leak, as bilirubin production for hemoglobin breakdown begins immediately. No, this is wrong. It takes around 6 to 12 hours and around 12 hours to form. Sentinel headaches are exclusively caused by warning leak, I have told you, of blood. Physical expansion or intramural hemorrhage of the aneurysm wall without extravasation cannot trigger this symptom. No, this is also wrong. They are saying that the blood has to be removed intramurally, that is within the wall of the aneurysm. No, the blood comes out, but the blood is so less, the aneurysm is so small that the non-contrast CT is not able to pick up. A sentinel headache may occur in 15-60% of subarachnoid patient and can precede a major rupture by days or week. Yes, often presenting with a normal neurological exam and potentially negative initial neuroimaging. Yes, this is what I was explaining you. Okay, because the LP shows stable RBC count between two, where the diagnosis of sentinel bead is confirmed and the patient should be discharged with the outpatient follow up. Now this is a sentinel bead, so you cannot send the patient. Okay, you could have sent the patient if there was a no RBC count. Okay, it would have been negative. It is making the diagnosis of sentinel type headache, subarachnoid hemorrhage, so you cannot send this patient. You could have sent this patient if LP was negative. Okay, so answer is C. Now coming to the cluster headache. That what is a cluster headache? So cluster headache, we have just told you that in medication overuse headache, we give bridging therapy in the form of steroid, and similarly in cluster headache we'll also use steroid. Now what are the symptoms? It is mostly, the cluster headache is mostly unilateral. For example, only single eyes will be, and the pain is for 15 minutes to 180 minutes. Remember, in cases of tension type headache in TTH, it was for 30 minutes to 7 days. And in it is pain is for 50 minutes to 180 minutes, that is half, that is from minutes to hours. And the pain is very intense. Pain is very intense. It is so intense that the patient have a, they think of suicide, having suicidal thought. So it is also called as suicidal headache. Intense suicidal headache. Now they are generally accompanied with autonomic features. And most of the book write that if there is no autonomic feature, you will not make the diagnosis of cluster headache. So pain is now very important point is, it is mostly males are involved than female, and the ratio is 4 is to 1. Mostly the male patient will be, and between the age of 20 to 40 years. In extremes of age, it is very rare. What are the autonomic feature? So if we take eye, you will see edema, you can see redness, you will see lacrimation, you will see ptosis and meiosis. Now please remember, there is no anhidrosis, therefore it is also called as partial Horner syndrome. It is called as partial Horner syndrome. Why? Because in Horner syndrome you have ptosis, meiosis and anhidrosis, but here there is ptosis, meiosis, but there is no anhidrosis. So this is also called as a partial Horner syndrome. This is what you see in cases of in case of eye. In nose, most of the patient will tell you about the nasal discharge, nasal discharge or nasal blockage. This is now very important point that I'm telling you. The pathology, if we talk of pathology, then most of the book write that pathology is not clear, but it is the posterior hypothalamus which is involved. Posterior hypothalamus which is involved, and posterior hypothalamus is involved in the sleep awake cycle and circadian rhythm. Therefore, this pain generally occurs at the same time in the night, and that is called as a time logged headache. That's why it is called as a time logged headache, because it involves posterior hypothalamus, occurs at the same time generally in the night and especially in the REM sleep. Now this is a very important thing. This is the only headache which is precipitated by the REM, that is rapid eye movement sleep. Also, because posterior hypothalamus is involved in this, now research is being done in deep brain stimulation, which involves treating of this cluster headache, which is a great problem for the persons or patients who are having it, is the deep brain stimulation of the posterior hypothalamus. So if they ask you a question, although they will not ask you that which part of the brain is involved in the cluster headache, you will say posterior hypothalamus, and deep brain stimulation of the posterior hypothalamus is being nowadays studied and is being talked about in the conference for the treatment of the cluster headache. So this is one of the headache which is aggravated or precipitated by the REM sleep. So this is also called as a time logged headache. Okay. So this is a very important thing. So if I ask you what are the things that can trigger it, so most common thing that it can trigger is alcohol. Secondly, I have just told you sleep and smoking. These things can trigger this. Now it is not triggered by light, as we have seen in the tension type of headache. It is not triggered by the light. A very important compound is nitroglycerin. So nitroglycerin should be avoided in these patients, even smell. So these things can trigger this cluster. Now if I talk about the treatment, so treatment is acute as well as the chronic. Now, if I ask you in acute, what is the most effective thing which is for the treatment of this um, clustered X? Though your answer will be the most effective thing will be oxygen, and that to oxygen at 10 to 12 liters per minute for period of 15 minutes, and in most of the patient it will abort the acute attack. That is 10 to 12 liters, and it is given through non rebreathing mask. So non-rebreathing because it can give you a increased FiO2 around 80 to 90%. So most effective treatment for cluster headache is oxygen. So they can also ask you which is the most oxygen is the most effective treatment in cluster headache. But if they ask you most effective drug, it is subcutaneous sumatriptan, and it is given 6 at a 6 ml. If that is not in the option, then answer will be intranasal 20 mg sumatriptan. Now, but we all know that sumatriptan or these triptans, they have a contraindication. What are the contraindication? They cannot be given in CHD. They cannot be given in the cases of the strokes. They cannot be given in cases of the CHD is coronary heart disease, stroke, and they cannot be given in cases of the uncontrolled hypertension. So what we will do in those cases? In those cases, the drug of choice will become octreotide 100 microgram subcutaneous. Okay, so only in those cases where sumatriptan, that is triptans, we cannot give, there the drug of choice will become the octreotide. Okay, 100 microgram subcutaneous. Now, in chronic cases, what is the most and please remember, as soon as you diagnose a patient with of cluster headache, you have to start the chronic treatment. And I have told you, between acute and chronic, what you will give? Between acute and chronic, you will give a bridge therapy, and bridge therapy will be same like that of the medication overuse headache. You will use steroid. The dose will be 60 mg per day for 7 days, and then tapering dose over 2 to 3 weeks. Now, what is the most effective drug? Answer is verapamil. So verapamil is the most effective drug. And if I ask you what is the dose is very, it is increased, started from 940 and taken to 960 mg. And that is why every 10-day guidelines say you have to do ECG, because that can cause severe sinus bradycardia. So the guidelines say whenever you are starting verapamil, you have to do ECG every 10th day. Whenever you are increasing the dose, for example, you are giving 240 mg, next you make it 500 mg, then on the 10th day you have to do the ECG and look for the sinus bradycardia. And the second line is, if verapamil is not working, then you can use lithium carbonate, that is lithium carbonate, although not used. Verapamil is very effective. Okay, now very I have told you about the stimulation, that posterior hypothalamus is involved, so you can do deep brain stimulation. Also, recently FDA has approved non-invasive vagal stimulation. Non-invasive vagal stimulation. What is non-invasive? So there is a gamma core. This is a device. This is just like a device like this, a charger. You can place it whenever you have a cluster headache. You can place it and click it at 21 or 22 intensity, and that will produce stimulus to the vagus nerve, and in 50 to 60% of the people that can abort a cluster headache. So it is FDA approved now. The device name is gamma core. In some countries they are also using it for the refractory migraine. So it is a non-invasive vagal stimulation. We know that non-invasive vagal stimulation is also used in cases of the refractory epilepsy and refractory depression. depression which is not responding to antidepressant drugs, even to ketamines, even to electroconvulsive therapy, transcranial magnetic introduction. If these things are not able to cure, then you can also use non-invasive vagal stimulation. Now, please remember a lot of European society have also approved the sphenopalatine ganglionic block that is given through the nose, have approved for the cluster headache. So for cluster headache, European society, this is especially mentioned in the CMDT, that European societies have approved sphenopalatine ganglionic block for the cluster headache. Now see this question. A 35-year-old male patient with bouts of excruciating non-thrombing periorbital pain lasting 45 minutes occurred twice nightly for the past 3 weeks. He exhibit ipsilateral meiosis and conjunctival injection. This is a what? This is the autonomic symptom associated with the pain for the 45 minutes. Bouts of excruciating non-thrombing pain. Which of the following statement regarding the pathophysiology of the management of this condition is most accurate? The cluster periodicity is primarily driven by the dysfunction of the posterior hypothalamus, which serves as the central generator of this attack. Yes, this is true. Prophylactic treatment with the verapamil should be initiated only after the current cluster period. No, I have told you, this is a condition where this is the case. This is a condition where the chronic treatment should be started as soon as the possible. Subcutaneous sumatriptan is contraindicated if the patient has already used high flow oxygen. No, you have to give high flow oxygen plus you have to give subcutaneous sumatriptan. The associated Horner syndrome is caused permanent. No, this that one thing I have told you. First of thing, the associated Horner syndrome here, that is ptosis meiosis. There is no anhidrosis, is partial Horner syndrome. So first thing, and second, it is temporary. So Horner syndrome here is partial Horner syndrome, and this is temporary. As soon as the uh, mm, attack is gone, Horner syndrome is gone. But please remember, the CMDT 22nd edition mentioned that in between the attacks, partial Horner syndrome can remain. But most of the books or most of the guidelines says that Horner syndrome is temporary and is gone once the cluster headache is gone. But CMDT, it has written, I have told you that since the incidence is of this cluster headache is even less than 1%, so it becomes very difficult to see patients of this kind. So, but most of the books and the colleges say that the Horner syndrome is not permanent. Okay. So this was regarding the cluster headache. Now coming to a very important thing, that is reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. Reversible cerebral vasoconstriction is also a very, it can also call the thunderclap headache. Okay. So light वहां से अच्छा. So now we are talking about reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome. This generally you see postpartum or during the pregnancy. Now, what happened in this syndrome? The exact pathophysiology is not known, but it is seen that the distal cerebral arteries, initially there is involvement of the distal cerebral arteries, for end arteries. For example, we see in tuberculosis end arteritis. Similarly, end arteries are involved and their vasospasm occurs due to a complex interplay of the neurotransmitters and a lot of substance. There is a end arteries vasospasm occur, but that is reversible. That remains for some time, that goes. Slowly, it comes proximally, and the proximal part of the arteries are involved. And what happen that if you see some portion of the arteries will be in vasospasm, some will be normal, then again some will be in vasospasm and some will be normal, and then some will be normal, some in the vasospasm. This is a This is specifically called as beads on string appearance. Beads on string appearance, but initially only the end arteries are involved. So most of the test that you will do, if you will do MRI, you will do CT scan, everything, and even if you do the coronary, sorry, cerebral angiography, all these tests comes negative, especially in the first especially in the first week. So in the first week of reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome, when the patient is having headache, and the most important thing about the headache in case of the reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome is there is recurrent thunderclap headache. We have seen that thunderclap headache, there are a lot of differential diagnoses, but for recurrent thunderclap headache, the only diagnosis is, and especially in the postpartum period, the only diagnosis is reversible cerebrovascular syndrome. Here the patient will tell you the symptom. What will the symptom will be reversible, or sorry, um, the recurrent thunderclap headache. They are known as RTH in the books. The reverse that are recurrent thunderclap headache. The patient will complain of recurrent thunderclap headache. And when you will do CT, MRI, CT, and even cerebral angiography, although no one is going to do cerebral angiography, everything will be normal. So this will raise the suspicion of this RCVS, that is reversible cerebral vasoconstriction. So most common or most sensitive or most specific, if they ask anything in the symptom, it is the R recurrent thunderclap headache, which occurs over a period of 1 to 4 weeks. And CT, MRI, everything is normal, although uh, cerebral angiography will show beads on string appearance, but that is after 1 week. So if they occur, you asked you which is the most sensitive investigation, then answer will be DSA, digital subtraction angiography. It is an invasive test and it will show positive even in the initial week, because it will even pick the disease when it is there in the end arteries, although it can also miss the disease, but it has maximum sensitivity that it will pick up the disease, although no one is going to do in practical life DSA for a headache. Now most specific investigation, if they ask you, then it is also DSA, but the answer will be DSA with reversibility. DSA with reversibility. What does this means? That you will have on DSA, you will have beads on string appearance. But please remember, beads on string appearance is also seen in cases of the PACNS, that is primary angiitis of the CNS. What is PA? It is primary angiitis of CNS. Here you will also see on the DSA beads on string appearance, but it will be irreversible. But here this beads on string will be reversible. So if they ask you which is the most specific investigation, then answer will be DSA with reversibility. Specific means that if it is present, then you cannot think of any other diagnosis. So most specific investigation is DSA, which shows reversible beads on string appearance, and it get reversed over a period of 3 to 6 months. And if it doesn't get reversed, it is PACNS, that is primary angiitis of the CNS. Now they can also ask you what is the last symptom. It is FND, focal neurological deficit. Generally in reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome, you will not get focal neurological deficit, but yes, it can be present. Now they can ask question regarding the risk factor of the RCNS. Now I will call this reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome as RCVS. Okay. Now if they ask you most common risk factor, so it is most common risk factor is vasoactive substance. And which vasoactive substance? It is the marijuana. Most that is cannabis. Cannabis, followed by cocaine, followed by ecstasy. What is ecstasy? It is basically MDMA. Okay, so if they ask you most common risk factor, it is vasoactive substance. And out of vasoactive substance, which is most common, your answer will be marijuana. Now, most common over the counter drug, it is, please remember, alpha agonist, used as a nasal decongestant. Used as nasal decongestant. Yes, for example, ephedrine, pseudo ephedrine, xylometazine, all those. Most common prescribed drug. If they ask you not over the most common prescribed drug, then your answer will be your this SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Example, sertraline, paroxetine, duloxetine. Most common physiological reason, I have already told you. Most common okay, my pen is not working. Just a minute. Most common physiological reason is pregnancy. Most common physiological reason, as I have told you, is the pregnancy. We have discussed it. And the postpartum period. Most common underlying disease is migraine. Mainly, you will see this in people having migraine. And most common finding on CT scan is basically convex hemorrhage. What is a convex hemorrhage? It is a hemorrhage which is localized to one of the sulci. For example, if this is your brain, so it will be localized to just one sulci and will not go. For example, it will not be present in interpeduncular fossa, that is basal cistern, or in sylvian fissure. There will be no blood. That is called as a convex hemorrhage. Okay, and mostly CT scan will be normal. Now coming to the preeclampsia, I have told you the most common headache, most common type of headache in pregnant women will be preeclampsia. Now diagnosis of preeclampsia, we all know the BP will be more than 140 by 90 on two occasions. Please remember, initially it was 6 hour apart. Now on two occasion it is 4 hour apart. So if it is, now we have on two occasion, plus proteinuria. Proteinuria, or I'm telling you, or that means proteinuria is not necessary for the diagnosis. Any of the following. What? In brain, if you see scotoma, if you see headache, or if there is vision problem, or in lungs you see pulmonary edema, in liver raised ALT, AST. How much raised? More than or equal to 2 times. Kidney, if creat is more than 1.1, and in blood, if you see less platelet less than 1 lakh. If any of them is present, then you will say the diagnosis of preeclampsia is made. Now, if I ask you which is the most sensitive is the blood pressure finding. Why? The most sensitive is BP of more than or equal to 140 by 90 over two occasion 4 hours apart, because without hypertension you cannot make a diagnosis of preeclampsia, but without proteinuria you can make a diagnosis of preeclampsia. Now, what which is the most specific? It is proteinuria. Although it is not most sensitive, but if it present, it is highly specific of presence of the preeclampsia. Now they can ask you a very new question: which test has a maximum negative predictive value of preeclampsia? That means if this test comes negative, you can easily say that this person will not have preeclampsia over 7 to 14 days. So answer is soluble FM like tyrosine kinase. It is SFLT, that is soluble FM like, it is called as soluble FMs like tyrosine kinase. What is this? It is an anti-angiogenic factor, because we know in preeclampsia basic problem is the blood vessel. There is a defective remodeling which start from the 12 week and ends at the 20 weeks. So there is defective remodeling, so there is increased SFLT, that is which is an anti-angiogenic factor. It is an anti-angiogenic factor. And there is a placental PIGF, placental growth factor, which is decreased. It is it is an angiogenic factor. So a raised value means that a person will have chances of developing of preeclampsia, and a less value will rule out the chances. So if the value is less than 38 before 34 week, so it rules out preeclampsia for next 7 days. For the next although this test is not done in routine practice because the value is 8K to 14K, some fetal medicine center in India and abroad do it for study purpose. So if this value is less than 38 before 34 weeks, rules out preeclampsia. A value more than 85 before 34 week is highly suggestive of preeclampsia. This is, you have to understand. Okay, so this is a new thing which has a, so if they ask you maximum negative predictive value, you have to answer this. Now coming to the thunderclap headache, we have studied mode of the thunderclap headache. We have studied that thunderclap headache is seen basically in cases of subarachnoid hemorrhage, then reversible cerebral vasoconstriction syndrome, then we have in cavernous venous thrombosis, then pituitary apoplexy, and arterial dissection. So now we are coming into the pituitary apoplexy. What is pituitary apoplexy? I have already told you what is pituitary apoplexy. Pituitary apoplexy is basically the hemorrhage or the infarction of the pituitary, which is almost always associated with the macroadenoma of the pituitary. And if I ask you most common symptom will be the headache, and headache is very severe, that is thunderclap headache. So if someone asks you most common symptom, most sensitive, it is the headache, that is thunderclap headache. Most specific symptom, it is headache plus third nerve palsy. So if they ask you most specific third, what happens in the third nerve palsy? Eyes become out and down and out. Eyes become down and out. There is ptosis, and there is also double vision. So these things you see, the third nerve, it is highly specific, that is headache plus third nerve palsy. I have told you that in pituitary apoplexy, the most common nerve that will be gone will be the third nerve. Okay, the most dreadful complication, what is the most dreadful complication? It is the adrenal crisis. It is the adrenal crisis. Because of this, there will be a severe hypotension and shock, and if it is not cured properly, that can lead to the death. And what is the drug of choice? Here the drug of choice is IV hydrocortisone 200 mg stat followed by 100 mg TDS. So this is the least common complication, which is generally absent after which is generally present after pituitary surgery. After pituitary surgery, the most common complication that you see is diabetes insipidus, where there is hypernatremia and decreased urine osmolality. So in diabetes insipidus, you will see a hypernatremia and urine osmolality will be less than 300. But here it is seen that in pituitary apoplexy, diabetes insipidus incidence is less than 4%. So it is a very most common visual defect. Now, very important point that when to do surgery in pituitary apoplexy and when not to do surgery in pituitary apoplexy is generally asked. Now, I have told you the most specific symptom is headache plus third nerve palsy. Headache plus third nerve palsy, but it is not an indication. Even the third nerve palsy is not a indication. It is not a indication for surgery. It is not an indication for surgery. So third nerve palsy in pituitary apoplexy is not indication for surgery. Now most common visual defect is bitemporal hemianopsia. This lateral or the temporal part of both the eyes, you cannot see through them. That is called as bitemporal hemianopsia. Now, but it is an indication for surgery. When there is bitemporal hemianopsia or visual loss, then that is the indication of surgery. This you have to understand. Okay. Now coming to the vascular causes, I have told you the most common vascular cause for the headache is stroke. It is the stroke. Most common vascular cause causing headache is stroke. Which stroke? It is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Most common cause. And if they ask you least common cause, then your answer will be ischemic stroke. Now I'll tell you this, that stroke is of two types. Stroke means if this is your brain, the blood, there can be hemorrhage, that blood vessel rupture, the blood vessel rupture. If this is your brain and this is the blood vessel, then this blood vessel can rupture and blood can come out. This is called as hemorrhagic stroke. This is called as hemorrhagic stroke. Second is there can be a clot or atherosclerosis because of which the distal supply is gone. This is called as ischemic stroke. Now, although it appears that hemorrhagic stroke are common, but please remember the most common stroke is ischemic stroke. So 80% of the cases you will see ischemic stroke, and only 20% of the cases will be hemorrhagic stroke. And out of these hemorrhagics, 80% will produce headache. Will produce the headache, whereas in ischemic stroke only 20% produces headache. So although the ischemic stroke are common 80%, but they also, this is called as 80-20. You see, most common is ischemic stroke, but only 20% produce headache. Now hemorrhagic stroke are further divided into two types. One is subarachnoid hemorrhage and second is intracranial hemorrhage. So if they ask you question which most common vascular cause causing headache, so your answer will be stroke, but it is hemorrhagic stroke and that is subarachnoid hemorrhage. And least common, your answer will be ischemic stroke. Okay, ischemic stroke is least. So I've told you stroke classification, 80% is ischemic stroke, but only 20% of them produces headache, and 20% are hemorrhagic stroke, and hemorrhagic stroke 80% produce headache, and it is divided into two types, subarachnoid hemorrhage and intracerebral hemorrhage. Okay, most common is subarachnoid hemorrhage which produces. This is regarding the headache. Now vasculitis related to headache, I have told you most common cause of vasculitis causing headache is giant cell arteritis. It is giant cell arteritis. So most common cause of vasculitis. Now basically there is a criteria that is called as ACR criteria, American College of Rheumatology, which has given the criteria in 1990 for the diagnosis of giant cell arteritis, although it is no more used now. So what is it? Is say a new headache. This is very important. A new headache first, second after the age of 50 year. Third, if the reason is temporal, and on palpation there is tenderness, you see on region you see tenderness or decreased pulsation. Fourth, ESR is raised or you see biopsy is positive. If any 3 out of 5 is positive, then you can make the diagnosis of giant cell arteritis. So this was the ACR criteria, that is American College of Rheumatology. But please remember, this criteria is now no more used. Now if they ask you what is the most common symptoms, most common symptom is headache, and that too, and the most common location is temporal area. Most common location is temporal area. What is the most specific symptom if they ask? It is jaw claudication. It is the jaw claudication. When you will go give USMLE examination, so they generally ask you what is the, they will give you, so if they give jaw claudication with headache in old age, it is giant cell arteritis. Jaw claudication is like what? It is like the angina of jaw. It is like the angina of jaw. That means whenever you will start eating, there will be pain, and once you stop eating, chewing, the pain will be gone. So it is just like exertional angina. On exertion there is pain, on chewing there is pain, and when you take rest, you don't chew, the pain is gone. That is called as jaw claudication. It is the most specific sign. Okay, if they ask you what is the most sensitive test, so your answer will be ESR plus CRP. But if you have to choose one, then you have to choose CRP over the ESR. So this is the, now if they ask you most specific, so simply it will be the biopsy. Now problem is that if this is the artery, it shows skip lesion. Some part is involved, some is not involved. So generally in 40% the biopsy comes false negative. So a negative biopsy doesn't rule out giant cell arteritis, because it it follows, there is a skip lesion and it can come negative. So the rate of false negative is very high. So if this give you, they give you a case where a patient of age more than 50 year comes with a new headache, ESR is positive. And one more thing, the most dreaded complication of giant cell arteritis is painless unilateral loss of vision. Painless unilateral loss of vision. And what this is, this, and what this is known, and what this is known. Hello? Ha, Prince? Ha, good evening. So the most dreaded complication of this giant cell arteritis is painless unilateral loss of the vision, which is known as amaurosis fugax. Now, so if they give you a patient of age more than 70 years, headache with raised ER and vision loss, then they will ask you what is the next step. So next step will never be a biopsy, because that if you do the biopsy, the patient can lose his or her eyesight. So next will be the treatment, that is corticosteroids, which will be followed by the biopsy. So this is the, they generally ask this. So I have told you most of the things. Now one thing that generally asks is most common relation with which disease. They ask you, generally they will give you a symptom of giant cell arteritis occurs in PMR, polymyalgia rheumatica. In this, there is 50% association of PMR with the giant cell arteritis, because in 50% of the patient of polymyalgia rheumatica, they can develop giant cell arteritis. And what happen in PMR, there is a stiffness and there is pain in the neck, in the proximal upper limb and proximal lower limb. This is what is seen in cases of the polymyalgia rheumatica. This you have to understand. So this is generally given in the question. Now one thing that is left is uh, cavernous sinus thrombosis. What is cavernous sinus thrombosis? This we all know, this is a sphenoid bone. This is sphenoid bone, and this is a depression which is known as sella turcica, and this is pituitary, and the venous structure around this pituitary on both sides is called as cavernous sinus. This is known as cavernous sinus. And if the thrombus form is in the cavernous sinus, that is called as cavernous sinus thrombosis. One thing that is very important is that before the advent of antibiotic, this cavernous sinus thrombosis was 100% fatal. This was 100% fatal. But after the advent, the making of the antibiotic, the uh, percentage of people having fatal disease has brought down to the 15%. So this is a very important thing. Now, if we see this, we have a third nerve here, then we have a fourth nerve, then ophthalmic division of the fifth nerve, and maxillary division of the fifth nerve, and this is the sixth nerve, and this is internal carotid artery. This is very important. So this is third nerve, this is fourth nerve, ophthalmic division of the fifth nerve, maxillary division of the fifth nerve, and it is a sixth nerve, and this is the internal carotid artery. So if there is a clot, the first nerve that it affect is sixth nerve. So in cavernous sinus thrombosis, the first nerve which is involved is the sixth nerve. Please remember, the first nerve which is involved is the sixth nerve, as compared to pituitary apoplexy, which grows superiorly and laterally, and the first involved nerve is the third nerve. So in pituitary apoplexy, the most common nerve which is injured is the third nerve, whereas in case of cavernous sinus thrombosis, the most common injured nerve is the your this pituitary apoplexy is the sixth. Cavernous sinus thrombosis is the sixth nerve. Most common symptom. Now, most common, if they ask you age, so age is 20 to 50 year, and it happens equally in male and female. But pregnancy increases the chances of this cavernous sinus thrombosis because it is a hypercoagulable state. Most common symptom is the pain, that is the retroorbital pain. Retroorbital pain is the most common symptom. That is, most common symptom is headache with retroorbital pain, although pain can also be seen in forehead in the temporal region, but generally it is a retroorbital pain. Now there is a most specific triad, which is fever plus eye pain, that is ophthalmoplegia plus eye edema. Some books instead of fever also write sepsis. So this is the most specific triad if they ask. But if they ask which is the most specific criteria which is seen in less person, but if it is present, it is highly confirmed that it is a cavernous sinus thrombosis, that is presence of this triad, that is fever, sepsis or eye pain plus in one eye, and within 48 to 72 hour it goes to the second eye. If this happens, that means it is most specific sign that the person is suffering from the cavernous sinus thrombosis. Now most common nerve, I have told you, it is the sixth nerve which is in. So this is cavernous sinus thrombosis, and the treatment is antibiotic. Antibiotics. Okay. So this was regarding the approach to the headache. The first. Now we will discuss in the second lectures we will discuss the migraine, then we will discuss the seizure, then stroke, localization, sign, and slowly we will finish the whole neurology.